Hi everyone, welcome to the Web3 Accounting Radio, the podcast where we dive into the fascinating world of Web3 finance and compliance. And I'm today's host, Diana, and my partner is Wei Xiang. Hi, Wei Xiang.
Hi, Diana.
And today we have a special guest called Raynold. And Raynold currently serves as the compliance officer and Bitstamp, the world's longest running crypto exchange. Bitstamp holds more than 50 licenses across various jurisdictions to provide crypto service. Focusing on Singapore, Bitstamp currently holds an in-principle approval for the MPI license to provide cross-border money transfer and digital payment token service in Singapore under the Payment Service Act. Over the span of his career, Raynold has held compliance roles at notable payment and crypto firms such as Wallets, acquired by MDAQ Group, Sparrow, acquired by Amber Group, and Metacomp. And nice to meet you, Raynold.
Hi, nice to meet you, Diana and Wei Xiang. Thanks for
Yeah,
inviting me today.
today is very exciting day where we have a compliance officer in Singapore from a soon to be licensed MPI licensed entity, bringing us through travel rule deep dive and also speaking about unhosted wallets in Singapore. So over to you, Reina.
Hi guys. So I'm Raynold. I'm currently with Bitstamp lah, right? So Bitstamp currently holds an IPA in Singapore, and then we expect to get the license sooner rather than later to provide cross-border and digital payment token services, right? So just a brief introduction before we start over to travel rule. So the Payment Services Act came into force in 2020. Then digital payment tokens, in short, DPT, so commonly known to like retail investors or other customers, it's known as cryptocurrencies lah. So this is regulated under the Payment Services Act in Singapore, right? So as a crypto service provider in Singapore, we are obligated to comply with the travel rule. Okay. Yeah. So travel rule is something that is quite complicated to like the average investor or average customer, right? So I'm trying to like break it down so that it's something easier to understand for everybody, right? So basically, travel rule is like the accompanying data message that goes alongside your crypto transfers between financial institutions, right? So this came about when like FedF, the international body with regards to like anti-money laundering, they provided this guidance under Recommendation 16, right? So it's called travel rule, like as mentioned in the name, because the information that needs to accompany the crypto transfer is traveling alongside the crypto transfer, right? So basically, in essence, right, what is travel rule? Where was it first derived from? It actually was derived from like your traditional finance, for your wire transfers, right? Like your SWIFT, your SEPA, your FAST, your ACH. So the banks actually have to communicate between each other, right? When you're making a wire transfer, they'll actually send a SWIFT message over to the other bank, stating information like the originators' names, the beneficiaries' names, date of birth, etc., addresses, and etc. of those likes, right? So the whole purpose of like travel rule is to counter money laundering and terrorism financing, right? So how does it work exactly, right? When I'm sending a message over from like the originating crypto service provider, I will send like my customer's name, date of birth, account number, IC number, ID number, passport number, some information like that falls under personal data, over to the beneficiary crypto service provider, right? Along with the beneficiary customer of these crypto assets, right? So it is the duty of like the receiving crypto service provider to verify that the beneficiary customer exists on their end, right? And then to confirm and send a message back to the originating crypto service provider to confirm this, right? Before the ordering service provider sends it over, or before the beneficiary service provider credits these funds to the beneficiary customer, right? So the whole point of this is to make sure that customer A sending over to customer B, it's not to launder money, it's not for terrorism financing, and then the beneficiary crypto service provider also fulfills his obligations of doing all these checks, right? Basically. Because it is so easy to like just launder money if like you don't do all these checks. You don't know who you're sending to, right? Your customer A can like basically say name ABC or DEF or whatsoever, and then they can just send it over. And if you process it without checking, essentially, right, you have abetted money laundering, for example, right? So I think one of the more misconception is that just by sending out the message, right, the data message, technically the originating institution, the originating crypto service provider has fulfilled their obligation. But to like actually successfully combat money laundering, the beneficiary crypto service provider actually has to do like the checks that such a customer B exists on their end, and that they have actually like onboarded customer B and done the necessary due diligence and provided a confirmation back to the originating crypto service provider A, right? If they don't actually do these checks and they don't actually provide the confirmation, technically you haven't actually combated money laundering in that sense, right? Yeah. So we'll move on, right? Like travel rule is something that is so complicated. It is like so nascent in the industry. It's been here for some time, but I think like when people talk about travel rule, like at least for like the practitioners like in the industry, right? Like it's easy to talk about travel rule, but the practicability of travel rule and to actually put it into reality, implementing it, I think it's something that is so complicated, very, very complicated. And then you will realize that like there not many entities or even jurisdictions know how to comply with it and actually comply with it, right? So one of the first challenge that travel rule faces, implementing travel rule, would be something called the sunrise issue. Basically, the sunrise issue came about because I think people in the crypto industry will be familiar that certain jurisdictions have a more robust crypto regime, regulatory regime, as compared to other regimes. Like say Singapore, for example, right, where I'm based in. Singapore is known for its robustness in its digital payment token crypto framework, right? It has like set out travel rule requirements versus like another country which has not actually don't even talk about travel rule, for example. They don't even have a crypto regulatory regime, right? So say when I'm actually a crypto service provider in Singapore and I actually have to comply with travel rule under the notices set out under the Payment Services Act, how do I actually comply, right? Because complying with the travel rule, there are two portions to it. Like one component is me being the originating institution, originating crypto service provider, and then the other portion is being the beneficiary crypto service provider, right? But sunrise issue came about when different regimes implement crypto like at its own pace, at its own time, differently from other regimes, right? So when I want to communicate, right, so the whole point of crypto is to be cross-border, right? I can send crypto over to like another jurisdiction, like say Singapore to like United States. Say, for example, like where I'm from, Bitstamp Asia wants to send over to like Coinbase USA, for example, right? I will be able to do so. I just need to comply with travel rule, right? But so complying with travel rule, I would then require the US to have a similar travel rule implementation or requirement as Singapore, for example, right? Because if there's no such requirement or no such incentive or motivation for the crypto service provider in US to oblige with complying with the travel rule, technically they wouldn't do it, right? They wouldn't have to do it, and they wouldn't do it because travel rule has like all sorts of cost to it, like the complexities of like implementing travel rule. So when I, as a service provider in Singapore, I send a message, I'm technically sending to nobody, right? So I can't send to anybody. So how do I actually confirm that they are sending over to customer B as who they are saying on the beneficiary service provider, right? So that is the first issue. I think like if you're in this space, you hear there's something very, very common, like this sunrise issue. So basically the sunrise came about because like different jurisdictions have like they come up, the sun rises at different times, basically, right? I think the next thing that is difficult about the travel rule is like interoperability, basically protocols, right? So there are different protocols that exist in for travel rule, right? So just like your traditional finance, you have SEPA, you have SWIFT, you have FAST, you have ACH, right? Yeah. So for travel rule itself, for crypto itself, there are several ones in the space. Like I can drop some names, for example. Like you have Trust, you have Verified VASP, you have SumSub, you have GRT, for example, right? And the biggest problem with like this is that it's not interoperable. So basically, when I send a message via protocol A, I can't communicate with someone who is not on protocol A, right? Basically, as a service provider, it is like as a crypto service provider, it is so difficult for me to communicate with another crypto service provider because when I have so many different counterparties, right? So many different crypto service providers that I interact with, and then A is on protocol A, for example, B is on protocol B. Like what this means is,
Reina, sorry to stop you here, but
yeah.
why is it that we can send an email, but you are saying that it's so difficult to send messages across?
Right. So they are not going through an email, right? For all these protocols, it's actually in a protected environment due to like personal data, like protection is required. Yeah, some examples of this. There are other implementations as well, such as like they call this VASP attribution, whereby these protocols, these protocol service providers, they have also integrated with other blockchain analytics so that they can help to identify, such as, I give some examples, they have integrated with Chainalysis, they have integrated with Elliptic. So Chainalysis, Elliptic, they are able to identify like this particular address belongs to Bitstamp, this particular address belongs to Coinbase. So when you want to send a message out to a particular address, if Chainalysis or Elliptic has identified this particular address and labeled it as such, then they will know these protocols and switches will know where to send this particular data message towards. So that will be one reason. The other reason that I mentioned will be personal data protection. So this has to be like enclosed environment, right? Yeah. So the thing about these protocols is like, so if I'm on if my counterparty beneficiary service providers, crypto service providers are on different protocols, essentially I have to integrate with all these protocols as well. And each protocol, the integration, it costs so much human capital and so much financial capital as well, right? It's so expensive. Like, I mean, I've tried to like integrate with some of them, and the cost is really like basically compliance costs for this are really, really not cheap.
And that's how compliance officers get paid.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So basically, like having all this, it's not feasible to have all these different ones, right? I can share something as well. So like in certain it's known in the industry as well that like say some of these players, when they get onto a particular protocol, and then because I have to connect with them, right? Because my customers are either depositing from them or withdrawing towards them, I have no choice but to integrate with this particular protocol, right? So you will see a monopolistic effect that starts to happen in this in the travel rule space. And I think from my personal opinion is that I think at one point of time we'll see consolidation. The number of protocols out there will consolidate, we'll have lesser, and then most of the major players will congregate on one of them for travel rule, right?
So just checking, can a licensed exchange in Singapore receive money from an exchange in a country which have not implemented travel rule because of the sunrise effect?
Right. Yeah. So with regards to crypto, right, and travel rule, so can you receive from another entity that does not have travel rule in effect? To be honest, the travel rule obligation actually, like when MAS sets it out, right? The obligation is actually set out on the originator. So it is the originator's responsibility to send the message out, right? For the beneficiary, which is in this case what you just mentioned, MAS has obviously acknowledged like how difficult it is to like get a response from another crypto service provider who is sending towards you, right? So MAS has like left it to the service providers on a risk-based approach, whether for you to receive and credit these crypto assets, right? So as you know, like crypto, when I want to deposit to an address, there's no stopping it. So I would say that the depositing will definitely happen. It's just whether you choose to do the crediting of this crypto towards your customer, right? I think another thing, so risk-based approach can happen in many ways. Some of the ways which the entities use is like checking if there are any exposure on the blockchain, right? Any dirty exposure, tainted exposure towards dark web or whatsoever. This particular exchange, does it have any adverse news, for example? Yeah, some examples of like how risk-based approach is being conducted before we credit the customers this crypto. Yeah, right. Yeah, so like the thing about like another thing about travel rule is like a lot of like because of how difficult it is to implement it, how costly it is to implement it, a lot of service providers have ended up taking the wait and see approach. So like let's see the major players, how's it going to turn out? Where are they like which protocols are they onboarding with? And then before I take a step and before I have to make a decision to implement with which one now. Which I think it's difficult because it just becomes like a circular issue, right? Everyone just ends up with a wait and see approach. But I think that like if you were to weigh both sides of the coin, I think you also understand how difficult it is like as a business, right? To tell me that, okay, right, for the sake of complying, I will implement with one, but yet I cannot communicate with all my counterparties, right? So I think MAS has understood this as well. During my time with licensed crypto service providers in Singapore, I've received surveys from MAS about travel rule, the state of travel rule, the difficulties of implementing travel rule, of operationalizing. Yeah, and so I think that MAS is in a position whereby like they want to understand the difficulties that like the industry is facing and how to overcome this like industrial problem. Yeah. So yeah, I think I just wanted to share something about like the Singapore's approach to travel rule as well. Something unique that you wouldn't see in like FedEx recommendation and other jurisdictions implementation of the travel rule. Right. So in the notice under the Payment Services Act, MAS did not actually explicitly call out for crypto service providers in Singapore to have to do something called the counterparty due diligence, right? So in the FedEx recommendation, they actually requested for crypto service providers to do due diligence on each other. So due diligence can be like your licensing, can be like your CDD, can be your customer due diligence, like your processes, can be your data protection, can be like checks on your ultimate beneficial owners, your directors, do checks on adverse news screening, on blockchain analytics, for example, what is your risk exposure? So this is something interesting about the Singapore approach whereby they didn't actually state that you have to do this, right? I think my own personal opinion, when MAS did not set this out. I think is that MAS actually understands the difficulty in doing something like this, like having to have crypto service providers do due diligence on each other, for example. But I think that in the industry, like if some of the more well-known service providers like Verified VASP, like Nota Bene, they have come up with some sort of their own due diligence questionnaire that they offer it on like their platforms, whereby like you can either do it with them and then they'll share it with their other service providers that are onboarded with them, or Nota Bene, which is like when you fill it in with them, you can publish it on your page and other people can like review the information on your page as well, right? So even though it's not something that Singapore actually requires, Bitstamp Asia actually complies with this as well. Yeah, so just as part of like yeah, just something additional that Bitstamp Asia does, right? Yeah, so that's about travel rule actually, right? So next I'll move on to unhosted wallets, right? So what is unhosted wallet?